Hi, welcome to yet another episode of India This Week. This is Khalid Beg. Amina, unfortunately, is down with fever, and we have our fingers crossed that she doesn't have COVID. She's just gone for a test. So get well soon, Amina. And we have AIM, who's just come back from another foreign holiday, and he's just getting everyone jealous as always on Twitter. Who's flying Qatar Airways. How was your holiday?
It was actually work, but yeah, sure. I always enjoy travel, work or plane, irrespective.
All right. So obviously today is a bit of a somber note. Like we said in the episode, we wanted to talk about Shinzo Abe's. I hope I got that pronunciation correct.
Shinzo
Abe's tragic death. And the joke was, years back, somebody said ki Modi, Abe, and somebody niche wrote Twitter pe, Abe, ye kya baat karte hai? Abe aise baat nahi karte. And he was like, nee, it's Abe, it's the Japanese PM. So his tragic death, of course, and he, of course, was Japan's longest serving prime minister, India's dearest friend, and a very, very big well-wisher of India. Of course, India declared a day of mourning, state mourning, and the flag flew at half-mast today, and no, any get-together or anything was, cancelled today of all the VVIPs who were working for the current government. I want to take this a little different, AIM. Not many people know this, but Nalanda University, which was one of the world's most sacred and advanced learning centers for 600 years, before it was annihilated by that brute Bakhtiyar Khilji in 1200. For 800 years, it was in ruins. And it was none other than Shinzo Abe who came along, initiated, funded, and for the redevelopment of Nalanda. And of course, now you have this massive university in Rajgir. One doesn't know if it reaches the status of Nalanda, but that is the level of spiritual connect he had with the heritage, where we had thrown it in the dustbin, but it was the Japanese prime minister who said, "I want to redevelop it." Of course, this goes beyond geopolitical affairs, and he getting something out of it. So I want to pick your brain from that perspective of that, what a man he was for India.
Look, so basically Shinzo Abe was quite unique in Japan, that he was the first generation probably that felt that they did not bear responsibility for the war, and that nationalism wasn't a bad thing if it was channeled properly, right? At the same time, they also understood what the problems of nationalism were. So he was quite proud of his heritage. He was quite clear that Japan simply wasn't pulling its weight in terms of the economic power and soft power that it had, and also the military power it has. Don't forget, the Japanese Navy is probably one of the biggest. It's much bigger than the Indian Navy in terms of total tonnage, in terms of destroyers, in terms of vertical launch tubes, in terms of full tonnage. It's bigger than the Indian Navy, right? Very advanced technology, and they simply went exploiting it. So he set it on a path of course correction because he realized that Japan had become so big, it was impossible to contain it individually, and it had to be contained as a group. Now, when you combine his sort of nationalist ethos and a sort of look at history, and once upon a time, the Japanese used to think of Indians as highly civilized people. They had this concept of Sango, which is technically it's Chinese, but taken it a lot of formal things written in. So they've got their own script, hiragana and katakana, and then there's kanji, which is essentially Chinese characters imported in. But a lot of the words, so for example, 10,000 years in Mandarin would be wansui. In Japanese, it becomes banzai. So Sanko is basically the Chinese word for the three countries. And there were only three countries that were considered civilized. The Chinese only considered India and China to be civilized. The Japanese wanted to add themselves to it, so they called it Sango, the three civilized countries. It was India, China, and Japan.
How interesting. So that's
the Chinese
a window into why Nalanda, because that was the sacred place of learning.
Right, and it's where Buddhist learning was formally sort of canonized and imparted in a formal atmosphere. Right. There are many universities like that: Udantapuri, Vikramashila, Nalanda, and things like that. So it was also part of the sort of cultural re-establishment of Japan in that sense, but also to rekindle this sort of Buddhist linkage, this sort of dharmic linkage in a sense, as a cultural basis for a formal alliance.
Lovely. All right, continuing forward, AIM, no surprises that celebration by Chinese citizens on their popular social media app WeChat, their state-owned rogue media, Global Times, reveling and having a great time. And, you could also see the picture they had put was where he got the gun wounds. So they were, reveling in that kind of cheap thrills. And a nightclub in China was celebrating the assassination of Shinzo Abe. There were restaurants offering free food, bars offering free booze. How do you see this behavior by a huge section of Chinese, or would you say this is a very small section of Chinese?
So it's compared to the size of the country, A, it's a very small section.
All right.
B, remember, Global Times is a newspaper literally of sellouts. The head of Global Times was one of the students who led Tiananmen Square.
Oh, okay.
And so he is the quintessential sellout. अगर हम गद्दार की बात करें, it is him. Okay. Now, when it comes to China, I would say the reaction was small fringe elements, literally that, because I was traveling in China during the peak of the Doklam crisis, not Galwan, Doklam, in 2017. And they were nothing but kind.
Okay.
The Chinese troops, we used to keep getting checked, frisked, everything, but they were nothing but polite and kind. Right. In the train that we took back from Lhasa to Beijing all the way through, they were nothing but polite and kind.
Right.
In fact, there was this curiosity. Into, they'd want to come, talk to you, take pictures with you. Never rude.
All right.
Okay. So, look, every country has its little shits.
Okay.
Hinduism has its little shits. Islam has its little shits. China has its little shits. Right. Let's not extrapolate it to the country as a whole. Okay. The foreign ministry did incite a lot of hatred against Shinzo Abe, as did Global Times.
Right.
But remember, the biggest victims of the Chinese Communist Party are the Chinese themselves. The Japanese killed only about 10 to 12 million Chinese people. The most conservative estimate of Communist Party killings of the Chinese people is 35 million. The highest estimate is around 100 million. The most accepted estimate is around 70 million. So the Chinese Communist Party has killed between 3.5 to 7 times more Chinese than the Japanese Imperial Army ever did.
Right.
Let us not forget the Chinese are the first and worst victims of this horrible, nasty, genocidal Chinese Communist Party.
Right. How would you then, AIM, look at the basic sentiment of an average Chinese? Would you be able to dwell in his mind like he's indifferent to the assassination of someone like Shinzo Abe? Or, what would you gauge that as?
They would mostly be indifferent to it. They are mostly, see, the thing about China is you get into serious trouble for political problems, for political opinions. So, they've developed a society that doesn't really talk much in terms of politics.
All right.
Okay. They focus on local issues like local corruption, local this, local that, very deliberately.
All right. And to keep themselves safe.
Yeah.
All right. Carrying on, I am a very funny comment by Joe Biden. He said that, while there are many details that we do not know, and lo and behold, he said that violent attacks are never acceptable. Now comes the mother of all the gun violence always leaves a deep scar on the communities that are affected by it. Gun violence always leaves. Who the fuck wrote this?
Japan has some of the strictest laws to do with gun control. This was a homemade gun. Katta tha. You know what a katta is? What we call a katta in
Basic katta.
those homemade pistols in Bihar.
Biden, gun violence always leaves a deep.
So this is the thing. They should tell you, look, you've seen the caliber of both the press secretaries, the one who left, the redhead, and the current one who's an even bigger joke. Right. And then you have this speech and you're sitting and thinking first how domestic political agenda, but then you realize the idiot who wrote this doesn't even know the laws in Japan, doesn't even know the difference between a legal gun and an illegal gun. Mm-hmm. And it's just, they've gotten so used to jargon and buzzwords, they just find wherever they put in jargon and buzzwords.
Right. All right. Another thing, AIM, I mean, it's amazing. Like, obviously, we also awarded now, sadly, the late Shinzo Abe with the Padma Vibhushan last year. But even when it comes to the 110,000 crore ambitious bullet train project, right? A loan of 88,000 crores, which he, helped us get from Japan International Corporation at just a low interest of 0.1% over 15 years grace period. This was like as remarkable a great friend you can have. Your inputs on that?
So which is why Modi's response, have you ever seen him do threads and write eulogies before?
Right.
He actually wrote a long eulogy. He wrote a thread referring to him as my friend, my friend, my friend. It was personal loss. And then from the PMO handle, he separately tweeted out the official this thing as well. So, this was a man who had vision, who was willing to fix relationships. Because remember, when we tested our nuclear weapons in 1998, the Japanese reacted the worst. The Japanese and the Australians reacted the harshest. And see, Australia had no bone, but Japan is the only country that has suffered 2 nuclear bombings. So for them, it was a particularly emotive issue. And for him to turn it around from sanctions and condemnation all the way to alliance and approval, immense. He used his political capital to do that. So this was a guy who had vision. And that is why the Chinese hated him, because he was China's biggest enemy. It was literally like having... I don't know. It was like
Modi against Pakistan.
when Nehru dismissed Jinnah as a spent force and a joke, Jinnah had gone off to London. He had given up and he had gone off to London to become a barrister. When he heard Nehru said that, that's when he decided to come back to India and start up Pakistan. So had Nehru been able to control his mouth, Pakistan may not have been created.
Right.
It's like that. Had the Chinese not been such a bunch of bullies, Shinzo Abe would not have been what he ultimately became.
Right.
And thank God for that. I mean, I'm very grateful for Shinzo Abe.
Right. Another thing, digging a little deeper, is it also because of a common polytheist past of Japan and India, of course, now also with Shintoism being a big part of there, where there is this bonding between India, Japan, which goes beyond the geopolitical and more spiritual and something which there is that deep bond. Do you see that as well?
There wasn't, there isn't a deep bond anymore. There used to be a deep bond. There was the need for civilizational validation from India. Mm-hmm. Which after that, it was more a need for civilizational validation from the West. In a sense, when Narasimha Rao started his Look East policy, because he's like, look, all we get is spat on by the West. Let's look East instead, where people don't judge us.
Right.
Shinzo Abe did the same thing. Mm-hmm. He was like, look, what is the point of all of this? We need our own cultural heritage and our identity. Let's create this linkage. So it was the creation of a cultural linkage in a sense. It was creation of a new source of validation. Right? Because remember, a lot of the West, they'd either look at things, the West caricaturizes everything. Either you will have people coming to Varanasi and saying how nice, or they go to the langar at the Golden Temple. Have you noticed every food show has to do the langar at the Golden Temple? And every food show has to do butter chicken.
Right.
हम बटर चिकन के सिवाय और कुछ खाते नहीं है क्या इस देश में? कितने सारे चीजें खाने के लिए? But they have to eat butter chicken.
Right.
Or it's Mussalman khatre mein hai, genocide, this, that.
Right.
So with Japan, it's the same thing. It's either the Yakuza and the lack of social mobility and the horrific work culture and casteism in Japan, which people don't realize, but it is. Or it's samurai and steel and sushi and shashi.
And the greatest disciplined civilization in the world.
Yeah. So it's heavily stereotypically caricatured.
All right. Another thing, Abhijit, what do you see with regards to his role in Quad, right? I mean, was he the most monumental chain in that?
He really was. He was probably the biggest mover of the Quad.
Mm-hmm.
And his talent lay in the fact that he could take other people along. Because remember, Barack Obama, for him to agree to something like the Quad was a big step. Because initially, Obama wanted to cut out India, Japan, everybody. They floated that idea of the G2 between China and America controlling the world.
Okay.
And ultimately, China also said, screw you. That was China's mistake. They should have never said, screw you. But for Shinzo Abe, and remember, Obama let down Japan on multiple occasions. When China tried to, stake a claim to the Senkaku and Senkaku Daio, whatever you want to call it, islands, the Americans put out this very strange statement saying, Dekho bhai, our alliance only holds if Japan is attacked, disputed territories are not really covered. So he was essentially throwing Japan under the truck. Mm-hmm. In spite of that, he persevered and he created the Quad. He pushed the Quad through. And it became a very, very, well, he hoped it would become potent. It is not potent in any form or way, but he certainly created a tool for diplomatic coercion, even though it hasn't realized its full potential in terms of military coercion.
Right. Also, interesting fact, big personal loss for Modi, because even before he was the PM, and this is like before 2014, there were just 3 people that Shinzo Abe used to follow on Twitter. One was a Japanese journalist, one was his wife, and one was Modi. So that is quite an interesting...
Yeah. I think both of them saw themselves as civilization. I think that entire concept of a civilizational nation.
Right.
And people who are proud of their past, accept the dark sides of their past and want to move forward. Right. Talk economics. That was something that really appealed to him.
Right.
And because China was the threat. See, right. There were 2 sources of validation that Japan had historically, China and India. That's why I brought up Sango.
Right.
China is your enemy. You can't seek validation from them anymore.
Right.
So you seek it from the other source of validation, which is India.
Right. Lastly, Abhijit, in your visits to Japan, what has he meant for his people? Like, what does Shinzo Abe mean for them? What kind of a leader was he? Is he a sentiment for them?
See, the very strange thing about Japan is political conversations there are very, very strange. They seldom have
political. AIM get very bored in his visits to Japan.
Yeah, I do actually.
All right.
I do actually, because they all have a view on China, which is China is a threat, China is evil, North Korea is a threat, North Korea is evil.
Okay.
But when it comes to individual personalities, what do you think of Prime Minister Yasuhiro Nakasone? What do you think of Junichiro Koizumi? What do you think of Shinzo Abe? You'll be like, oh, he's good. Okay, yes, good. Hi, so this. And it's that, it's like, I've never found a people who are quite free to express themselves. It's not like China where you are incentivized not to talk politics.
Right.
To a country like Japan, where I found that They just don't have very strong opinions on politics. Strange.
There's not much sentiment attached.
No, there is no. It's but at the same time, they would be very shocked by what has happened because they wouldn't have thought that this was a political past that would be revisited anytime, or a prime minister of Japan could be assassinated anymore.
Right. And lastly, Abhijit, your view on, does this change the world order a little in South Asia? Does it make Modi feel a little more lonely now?
Look, he's lost lots of kindred spirit friends, hasn't he? He lost Trump.
Right.
He lost Bojo.
Mm-hmm.
Though the new prime minister will also be conservative. He lost Abe, though lost in a different sense.
Right.
Even though the prime minister who replaced him is also a conservative. Well, technically LDP, but let's call them what they are, conservatives. He lost Scott Morrison, who was a conservative.
Right.
Who's replaced by Anthony Albanese, who's a horrible trade unionist. So, yeah, he's the only sort of right-winger original leader still standing.
Right.
And I use the term right-wing very loosely because, I don't think the BJP is right-wing at all.
That's right. All right. I think on that note, this was a small tribute to a man who truly loved India and was a big well-wisher. It's a big loss for India, but also it's a time to celebrate his legacy and for a great world leader. You could see a lot of big world leaders, mourning his demise. And with that, we leave you. Hope you have a great weekend. And thank you, AM, for shedding so much light on Japan and India relations and what Shinzo Abe was. Thank you so much.
Thank you.